Good evening. Welcome to Left, Right and Centre. I'm Vishnu Shom. On the programme tonight, the government today said that it had asked Canada to downsize its diplomatic presence in India and cited the interference of Canadian diplomats in Indian affairs as the diplomatic row over the killing of a Khalistani terrorist escalated sharply. This was hours after India suspended visa services in Canada, potentially impacting thousands seeking to travel to the country. The Canadian diplomatic presence in India is larger than what India has and accordingly needs to be downsized, is what the Foreign Ministry said. On the show this evening, the implications of what has now become an out-and-out diplomatic war between India and Canada. We are also keeping a close eye on developments in Parliament any time now. We expect the Women's Reservation Bill to be passed in the Rajya Sabha. That will be a historic moment indeed. But first, a quick look at the key statements made by the spokesperson of the External Affairs Ministry as Indian and Canadian relations just keep crashing.
You are aware of the security threats being faced by our High Commission and consulates in Canada. This has disrupted their normal functioning. Accordingly, our High Commission and consulates are temporarily unable to process visa applications. We will be reviewing the situation on a regular basis. Yes, we have informed the Canadian government that there should be parity in strength and rank equivalence in our diplomatic presence, in mutual diplomatic presence. Their numbers here are very much higher than ours in Canada. The details of this are being worked out, but I assume there will be a reduction from the Canadian side. To us, it appears that these allegations by the Government of Canada are primarily politically driven. No, let me clarify. No specific information has been shared by Canada on this case, either then or before or after. We have, as we have said, or I think we've been made very clear, we are willing to look at any specific information. We have conveyed this to the Canadian side, made it clear to them that we are willing to look at any specific information that is provided to us. But so far we have not received any such specific information. There was a indirect question on that. Let me also point out that from our side, very specific evidence about criminal activities by individuals based on Canadian soil has been shared with the Canadian authorities on a regular basis, but not been acted upon. The issue of safe havens and places to operate is being provided abroad, including in Canada, and that we would expect that is the main focus. The question is, do we have the political will to address terrorism, or we want to justify it and condone it? So I think that's what we would like to say.
Well, joining us now, Ambassador Rajiv Dogra. We're also joined by Ambassador Veena Sikri. Thank you very much for being with us. Let me come across to you first, Ambassador Sikri. Where exactly do you feel India-Canadian relations are right now? Is this the worst impasse in our history?
In the history of our bilateral relations, yes, most certainly. This, I think, it's never been so bad before. But I would say that this time, the government of India has decided to take a very firm stand. We do know that right since 1985, since the Air India Kanishka bombing, since that time, the government of Canada has just not heeded India's pleas and importunities that, look, it's the Khalistani groups living in Canada who are doing this, and they are involved, and there was evidence on it. So much evidence in the case of the Kanishka bombing. No cognizance was taken. Evidence was destroyed. It was not even 3 people were arrested. They've been released. Coming on from then up to now, repeatedly, even Interpol notices, red corner notices issued by Interpol based on specific evidence were given to the Canadian government, completely ignored, no action taken. And today, of course, it's a situation where the political life of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau depends on the pro-Khalistani Jagmeet Singh NDF. And so he is absolutely, in their hands, and they want to use this occasion to draw as much international attention to the so-called Khalistani issue as possible.
Right.
And on the other hand, in India, you've got all political parties supporting the government of India. And, you've got even the people in Punjab from the Gurdwaras, from individual live stream, they are all saying there's no Khalistani impact here. But there, with the help of the ISI and others, they just want to keep it alive. And can you imagine that this assassination took place 3 months ago? There must have been investigations ongoing by the police. Not a shred of evidence has been provided. And on the other hand, he goes and makes a statement in Parliament and then decides to expel a senior Indian diplomat. I mean, this is absolutely unheard of. And from there, of course, Indian government would not stand for it. So we've expelled theirs. They've issued an advisory. And in our advisory, we said, because of politically condoned hate crimes. I mean, there just could not be a stronger statement than that. And there's an attempt today in Canada to divide the Hindus from other members, from the Sikhs and the Muslims. And, there's an appeal. I think the Khalistanis are telling the Hindus, you leave Canada. Can you imagine? Even a Hindu member of the Liberal Party, of Justin Trudeau's party, has objected to this. The leader of the opposition in Canada says,
I just wanted to go across to Ambassador Dogra for a moment. Ambassador Dogra, the fact that India has told Canada that you need to downsize your diplomatic mission over here. They've said it on two grounds. Firstly, they've said there needs to be parity in terms of the number of diplomats. Canada evidently had more diplomats in India than vice versa. But they also did say that there was interference by Canadian mission personnel in India, which is another reason why they've requested Ottawa to do this. What is the signal that Delhi is sending over here?
Well, the signal that Delhi is sending was also in the spokesperson's words that Canada has been a safe haven for terrorists. So, which speaks a lot, which says a lot. The second thing, which spokesperson also pointed out, was that Canada has not shared any evidence, any information so far with us. Now, this proves that Trudeau has been lying in Parliament and outside the Parliament when he mentioned that Canada has already shared information regarding this murder with Indian authorities. If I'm not mistaken, he said he had personally shared that information. So what do we believe? Do we believe the Prime Minister of Canada's words, or do we examine every word of his to find out whether he's speaking the truth or he's giving one of those ones which don't mean anything?
In fact, I just wanted to ask Professor Max Abrams that point. Professor Abrams, if Justin Trudeau has evidence, and presumably there is something on the basis of which he made that statement in Canada's Parliament, wasn't it incumbent upon him to actually share that information with India? Because New Delhi, the spokesperson today said that we'd like to see the evidence. It's not come as yet. So therefore, if Canada is talking about taking India on board, India must be part of the investigation, the entire process, then what about sharing the evidence? He's done none of that. Isn't that strange?
I agree with pretty much everything that's been said on this program. However, if I were to guess, I do suspect that indeed the Indian government was directly involved in this targeted killing. That's really a separate question from whether we think it's justified, whether we take seriously Khalistani extremists, whether we think that Canada
but on what basis, Professor Abrams, do you say that you believe
the
that
reason why I think that reason why I'm just sort of hypothesizing. I do not have firm evidence, but that is my inclination because there is so much fallout to Canada right now. Canada is in more diplomatic trouble, I think, than India is. India has a lot of sticks to use against Canada in the way that Canada doesn't have against India. I suspect that this intel isn't just available to the Canadians, but that the Biden administration is probably keyed in here. Canada has a very close relationship with the U.S. and the Five Eyes group. So I do think that there are high-level eyes on this among them, even though the Biden administration refuses to sell India out. Whether the evidence exists and whether Trudeau supplies it are also separate questions. There could be good intelligence gathering reasons why Trudeau wouldn't want to share that evidence. And furthermore, the evidence might not be ironclad. It might not be 100%. It might simply be suggestive. But there's a lot on the intel side that the public isn't able to see right
Professor
now.
Abrams, so a couple of concerns over there. For starters, you've based one of your first remarks on a hypothesis that India was involved, when India in fact has said that India is not involved. Until that is borne out by fact, one way or the other, none of us actually know any better. And secondly, because there's never been any evidence of India doing that elsewhere in the past. And therefore it's always been a red line. And, let's just see what...
There are targeted killings that happen all over the world. This alleged targeted killing is getting a tremendous amount of attention. But there was just one carried out by the Turks against a Kurdish leader,
if
nobody cares.
That boils down to anything. I think it's a bit dangerous, Professor Abrams, respectfully, I think it's a bit dangerous to suggest that India was involved without a shred of evidence. That's my point.
I said that it was a hypothesis.
Right. And, it's a fairly dangerous one, given the sensitivities, I would suggest. If there is evidence, it shows up,
widely hypothesized.
All right. Let me just go across now to Ashok Malik, who also joins us at this stage. Mr. Malik, if you look at the India-Canada relationship and what is happening now, this disastrous situation with Khalistani extremists has been happening from the early 80s onwards. And at step after step after step, India has been denied access to people we want extradited, whether it was Justin Trudeau's father, who's denied extradition, several other governments which have come in Canada, denied extradition, to this situation right now where India is being accused. Do you believe that Canada is complicit in allowing these forces to grow, and that for them to say that they just don't know and it's freedom of expression is, for want of a better word, rubbish?
Freedom of expression is important to all countries, all democracies, to India, to Canada, to the UK, to the US. So I completely appreciate that. But if freedom of expression is accompanied by specific threats or incitement of potential violence, whether on Canadian soil or on Indian soil, whether directly or indirectly, one does expect that the host country would pay greater attention. If you look at just Indian diplomats, I'm not even looking at Punjab in India or other parts of India, I'm looking at Indian diplomats posted in Canada, in our High Commission there, in our consulates there. They have faced specific threats in recent years and in recent months and weeks, which were not always taken as seriously by the Canadian authorities as India would have expected. In one case, at the height of the COVID crisis, a crowd was allowed to gather in violation of COVID protocols outside the Indian consulate in, I think, Vancouver. And specific individuals were identified who had placed specific threats vis-a-vis Indian diplomats. Right. This knowledge was shared, this information was shared, but appropriate action was not taken. The second point I'd like to make is that, all of us have people who don't like other countries and say all sorts of things. It's the job of foreign offices and of governments who want to manage a bilateral diplomatic relationship to try and sort this out, to try and manage this, to say that, look, even if so-and-so is saying this about India or so-and-so is saying this about another country, we take that relationship much more seriously. This is not indicative of the way the government feels. That is the job of a government which cares for a foreign policy relationship. That's the job of any foreign office anywhere in the world. Sufficient sensitivity of that nature has not been shown by the Canadian government in recent years. And that is disappointing, to be honest with you. Even independent of what Prime Minister Trudeau has said, that by itself has been disappointing. And of course, Prime Minister Trudeau has taken to another extreme now.
Dariel Boardman, senior correspondent for the National Telegraph, joins us now. Mr. Boardman, as we try and look at this immediate situation, I think the larger concerns and the case after case after case of concerns about the activities of Khalistani extremists on Canadian soil that India has pointed out Isn't that the larger story here that we need to be focusing on?
Yeah, I mean, Canada should be focusing on it. Canada does have a long history of liking to keep its head firmly buried in the sand on issues of extremism. I mean, we've allowed the Khalistani movement to grow and foster since the 1980s when they committed the largest terrorist attack in Canadian history. So this should be the story. And listen, if we want to blame the Indian government for Harjit Singh Najjar's death, even though he's on TV firing AK-47s and talking about, killing different Hindus and all that, that's one. So if we're going to say India is responsible and we got motive and opportunity, if we're talking about blaming the Indian government for this, and we're going to say they have motive, right? So their motive is, hey, this guy's on TV threatening to kill Indians and Hindus and violence is an Interpol thing. All right, if that's going to be our motive to connect India to this, and it's still spurious motive because what's the utility of this assassination? I don't know. But then you have to answer the question domestically of, why does one of our allies have motive to take this guy out? How did he get in? How did he get in when he was denied with a fake passport in 1997, then tried to get into a phony marriage, and then that was denied, and somehow he gets in 2015, and now it's 2007, and he's off saying all these crazy things, right? This should domestically be a story where we look in on ourselves and say, how the hell did this happen? How did we get here? Right? Then there's the other thing of internationally, we gotta, protect our sovereignty, blah, 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 blah. But you're right. Domestically, the conversation Canadians should be having is, how did this guy get past our immigration system? Look at the friends he's keeping and what they're saying. How are they still here? And all the people currently in Canada going, this group of people, Hindus, Jews, whatever, and kill. We need to stop this. We need to cut it out. We need to do something about this because we've let it go on for far too long on many different planes. It's not just the Khalistanis. And this should be the number one priority in Canada. But we're not right. I mean, this conversation's starting to happen in segments of Canadian media, mostly online, alternative media sources, and it's starting to leak into the broader public. But I think you're absolutely right. We need some serious self-examination in Canada as to how we've allowed the Khalistani movement to foster and grow to a point where it's more popular in Canada than it is in the Punjab region. And that's just
sure.
Absolutely.
Daniel, another key point over here is that Indo-Canadians, most certainly including members of the Sikh faith, are some of the most successful, progressive members of Canadian society. They've done incredible amounts of work. And therefore, you've got this tiny minority of extremists in Canada, as a result of which there is this real concern that the entire community could be typecast as, they could be associated in some way, shape or form with this very small minority. And the fact of the matter is that the large majority are entirely peace-loving. They have nothing to do with Khalistan. They don't want any Khalistan. In many cases, they wouldn't even think it exists anymore as even a concept. They end up being in a situation where at the moment they can't get visas to travel back to India because of a diplomatic war.
Yeah, I mean, Canada has a long, productive history with our Sikh population. I mean, our history with Sikhs predates the formation of India in 1947. Because, World War I, a lot of Sikh troops distinguished themselves in the British Army, settled in Canada. A lot of Sikh people served valiantly in World War II, helped us defeat the Nazis. And again, there was very little problems until this fringe Khalistani element came in and was fanned, and we are 99.99% sure that the Pakistani ISI was largely responsible for funding and fomenting this within our country. We turned a blind eye to it. And yeah, I feel bad because, people might put the Khalistani nonsense onto the general Sikh population, which isn't fair. Stephen Harper, former Prime Minister, when we had good relations, he massively grew the Sikh vote in the Conservative Party. Sikh, participation went up. He had some very prominent Sikh MPs, and he did this without getting in bed with the Khalistanis. He just went to the Sikh community, learned their issues, told them they're regular Canadians, gave them the standard pitch of freedom. You came here for success and freedom, and we want to let you have religious freedom and raise a family and have a good job. And that works on a lot of Sikh people. And he brought them into the party. You don't need the Khalistanis to get votes. I am worried that the Canadian government's kind of doing everything they can to foment religious or ethnic violence internally in Canada and pit Sikhs and Hindus against each other, which is not productive.
No, not at all. And that remains a huge concern. Ashok Malik, let me just come back to you over here. The other aspect of this, and I briefly alluded to it, is that there aren't visas available in Canada for anybody wanting to travel to India. And the reason given is that the security situation is just so unstable that our High Commission and our consulate people can't work. It's a sad reflection of a reality where there is so much tension.
You know, there are three reasons why the government of India and the MEA have probably suspended new visas. They have not suspended OCIs. They have not suspended.
All right, we're just going to listen into Trudeau. He's talking about the situation. Let's listen.
Avez-vous l'intention de riposter à cette mesure-là?
Le Canada est un pays de droit. On est un qui cherche à défendre les droits de nos citoyens et les règles de l'ordre international. On va toujours le faire de façon responsable, mais de façon très ferme aussi.
Est-ce que vous regrettez, compte tenu des répercussions de votre annonce, est-ce que vous regrettez ce que vous avez dit à la Chambre des communes, à quel point vous êtes allé loin dans vos affirmations en début de semaine?
Right, apologies once again. We did take a question on India. We missed that answer. We will try and bring you the excerpts of that. Ashok, go ahead with what you are saying.
There has been, as I said, there have been specific threats against Indian diplomats and the Indian mission in Canada. I expect the threat perception would have increased after what's happened over the past week. And it would be completely understandable if the government wanted to regroup, make a fresh assessment of where threats stand, where security and risk arrangements stand, before opening up for visas again. And do remember, after what's happened, even threat perceptions vis-a-vis Canadians who want to visit India would have heightened. Greater scrutiny of visa applications will happen now. And that's completely understandable. So a temporary halt is very unfortunate, but again, given what's happened this week, perhaps understandable.
Professor Max Abrams, if you look at India and India's closest allies, many of the closest allies happen to be from the Five Eyes coalition that Canada is a part of. So therefore, if you look at it from an international standpoint, on the one hand, India has fantastic relations with the UK, with the US, with Australia as well, profound strategic partners. And then you've got Canada opposed to India, when in fact both nations are democracies and are bound by fairly sterling values. It seems bizarre at the global level.
Yeah, it is surprising. We're not used to seeing this kind of open conflict between democracies. Within international relations, there's a very well-known concept called democratic peace theory. Of course, India and Canada are not at war, but even this level of sort of open disagreement is unusual. I think that Canada is probably feeling very lonely, that it would have expected, based on its allegations, stronger support, especially from the United States. I think that the U.S., again, might be involved more than we know on an intel level, but in terms of their public response, it's been very muted, it's been very careful, and in that sense, I think that it's leaned pro-India rather than pro-Canada.
All right. Ambassador Sikri, is there an immediate way out of this? What are the reasonable expectations that India has at this stage, on the basis of which we can come out of this mess? No one wants India-Canada relations to be in the situation that it is at the moment. I think you're on mute, Ambassador Sikri. Can you unmute yourself?
It's very clear that at this moment, it is entirely up to the government of Canada. They have made this horrendous allegation, so-called credible allegation with two potential links, which is unheard of. Not a shred of evidence has been given so far. If they have the evidence, they should give it. If they don't have the evidence, they should retract their statement. If they want to talk about it, they should do it quietly and try and restore relations to what it was before. But if Prime Minister Trudeau thinks that, he's going to get all the Five Eyes intelligence together with him and, against India, that is just not happening. And more than anything else, I think for the people of Canada, they've now been so alarmed by the situation, law and order situation within their own country. Two Hindu temples were attacked even today. in two different cities. And why should the Indian High Commission expose itself to security risks when there are calls to come and kill the High Commissioner and the Consul General in Toronto? And the government is doing nothing about it, nothing about providing security, nothing about, castigating the people who are making the calls. It's a very sad situation. One would not have expected it at all from a country like Canada, who prides itself on being one of the safest countries in the world, to see a situation where this is what the Indian government said in its advisory was politically condoned hate crimes are taking place in Canada, and the government is doing nothing about it. If the government decides to do something about it, I think the situation can be restored. There must be visible evidence of the government of Canada putting down the Khalistani separatist groups, distancing themselves from these Khalistani separatist groups, and making it very clear that no attempts to minimize or reduce or disrupt the territorial sovereignty and integrity of India will be tolerated by the government of Canada. Certainly by the government of India, they will not. Our government is very firm. They will stay firm, and they will not move back an inch, because the situation is such that we have to stand firm at this point.
We're talking about the security and the safety of Indian officials in Canada, but I think it's less known, and this is a statement of fact, that the families and the of Indian officials in Canada and the officers themselves have been protected by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police for decades. And that is a reflection of the fact that the threat has existed for a very long period of time. It's just now that it's gotten to a stage where Delhi is making a statement as strong as this, saying that we can't get visas out if we aren't protected more, or we face a threat that is that serious. In fact, that threat has existed for a while. I'd like to thank you all very much